Alright, today's chapter 9.3, we're going to get into solving quadratic functions. Today's lesson introduces us to one method that is used to solve quadratic functions. There are a few that you have to learn this chapter, so make sure you try to practice each one. This method is more algebraic, so it is the most natural method for us to learn. So far we've learned the following rules using algebra. We've learned that addition is the opposite of subtraction, which means that if we're getting rid of a number that's being added, we simply subtract it. If we're getting rid of a negative number, we simply add it. We've also learned that multiplication is the opposite of division, so if we're getting rid of something that's being multiplied, we divide it on both sides. If we're getting rid of something being divided, we multiply it on both sides. Those rules have been used to solve a lot of problems. Some of those were a challenge because we needed to learn the order of the steps. For example, in this we had to learn that 3 is the weakest number, and so we moved that first by subtracting 3. And then we learned that we get rid of 8 by dividing it to get our answer of x equals 3. That was what we learned. We also learned that in this problem here, the 5 was the weakest number, so we multiplied both sides by 5. And again, the algebra that we did not change after that. Now the 2 is the strongest, so you move your 4. By simply doing that, 2x is equal to 26, and then we divided by 2 to get x equals 13. Again, that was the algebra that we used, and it's going to stay about the same, except we have to take one more note or one more rule into note. So you might want to write this rule down, is that squaring is the opposite of square rooting. That means that we can eliminate a square root by squaring both sides, and conversely it means that we can eliminate a square, which means a power of 2, by square rooting both sides. The biggest trick to square rooting both sides is that you must remember to use what we call the plus or minus sign, which is simply a plus sign over a negative sign. The plus or minus sign is a math shortcut for writing a positive and negative version of a value. For example, plus or minus 5 simply means you have a positive 5 and a negative 5 at the same time. So again, it represents positive 5 and negative 5 at the same time. Let's see if you can understand why there are two answers to this. If not, bring your notes up and I'll explain it to you a little deeper. But other than that, if it says, if we have the problem that x squared is equal to 100, we of course know that, or what we just talked about is that to get rid of this, we would square root both sides, which means that 10 is the number that multiplies by itself to be 100. So yes, 10 times 10, if you check, that is 100. So therefore, yes, 10 is a solution. But knowing our algebra, if we took negative 10 times itself, the two negatives make a positive 100 also. So that means that negative 10 is also a solution, which is why when you go to work that out, you want to make sure you practice putting positive or negative 10 as your answer, not just 10, because that's going to miss the whole problem. Again, there's no half credit for this. Make sure you understand, again, that plus or minus sign has to be there. Remembering that does come with practice. Today you're not going to type it in with a symbol, you're actually just going to use a comma. So if your answer on paper is plus or minus 5, you'll simply type 5 comma negative 5 into the computer on most of these problems. But again, you need to do this on paper so you get used to it. Alright. So solving these questions here, these are the 4 types of questions that you're going to see. Take good notes on them. I would say write each one down, that way you can see it. Pretty much, again, if I want to get rid of the floating squared, the way I do that is by square rooting both sides. The square and the square root cancel, and x equals plus or minus, because again, there, anytime you square root, you want a plus or minus. Do the second x squared, second x squared, 121. And it's going to give me the answer of plus or minus 11. On B, once you start getting more numbers, you have to remember that the exponent has the highest power, so that is the strongest bond that we've learned so far, which means 6 is the weakest. So we subtract 6 from both sides first, bringing down x squared equals 25. Again, to get rid of that x squared, we square root both sides. The square root of 25 is 5. We just have to remember to put the plus or minus in front of that 5. And again, your practice today is going to help you with that. As I said just on B, squared exponents are stronger than multiplication, which means in this situation here, the 8 is the weakest, and so the 8 goes first. And so you divide both of those sides by 8, bringing down x squared equals 4. You then square root both sides. X comes down because the square and square root goes away. Square root of 4 is 2, so your answer is plus or minus 2. And then on this last one, when you have a lot of things mixed in, exponents are the strongest, multiplication is next to that, and then that means that this 3 is the weakest. So we move the 3 By subtracting it, we bring down 1/5 x squared equals 20. Again, exponents are stronger than multiplication or division, so we get rid of this 1/5 because 5 is on the bottom by multiplying by 5. Again, the 5's cancel out. There's no need to bring down the 1. We just simply bring down x squared equals 100. To get rid of the squared now, again, what we are learning today is that you square root both sides. Don't forget your plus or minus and the number that represents the square root. These questions really aren't that bad, and you're going to have a lot of time extra once you finish this assignment. I do need you to make sure you finish this assignment first, though, or at least get about 80% of the work done. So what you'll notice is that your Math Excel has a flag on the last 2 assignments, and that you have to have an 80% on today's work before. Before moving on, though, especially for those of you who failed last quarter and might be in position to maybe get out of that, let me explain your testing changes for the quarter also. If you take a test and you are not pleased with your average, or I'm sorry, if you are pleased with your average, you do not have to take that test again. So if you take the test and you get an 80%, then that's good, and that's good for you, then you can leave your 80 in the book. If you take the test and you get a 100% and that's good for you, you can leave that 100% in the book. Even if you get a 60 and that's good for you, you can leave that in the book. But if you don't like your grade and you decide to take the test again, your new score is going to be the average of your 2 tests. It is not going to simply replace it. And so what that means is, before, if you got a 20 on your first test and then 100 on your second test, it would be 100. But that's not going to be the case. What's going to happen is I take your 2 scores and I average them. So 20 plus 100 is 120, and then I divide that by 2 to give you an average of 60% now instead of 100. If you don't like that 60 and you really fixed it to get your score up higher, you'll have to make up the test a 3rd time. And so what that means is, right now in the book you would have a 20 and a 100 that I keep track of. So you would have to take it a 3rd time and get another 100, which then would give you a 100 and a 100, which would increase your average, of course, to 100 or anything like that. Okay? So the average of your 2 highest scores is what's going to represent your grade for that test or quiz. That is, again, if you make it up. If you don't make it up, it's just the first test that you take. I leave it alone, and that's that. Also, we're going to be adding review information from the 3rd quarter right after spring break. So again, for those of you who failed the 3rd quarter, my best advice to you is to watch videos from the 3rd quarter on the material that you did not understand. It is up on Math Excel, and get ready for that, because I am going to give you 1 test retake on each of those tests. I'm going to do some review information for maybe a week, and then again 1 test retake over that test. So if you messed up on that test or got a 0 on that test, you need to make sure you pay attention there and that you actually show up. If you perform better on your test retake, your 3rd quarter grade will be affected. I'll change it. Although you cannot retake 3rd quarter tests on your own because I locked that out, you can make them up in class, but again, you must be present for that test. I'm sorry if you miss a day to make up a test, but this is a pretty big opportunity, and it has to be earned through your attendance. If you know you're not going to make it, and you if you arrange that with me ahead of time, we might be able to work that out. But simply not showing up on Friday and then coming back Monday and asking if you can make up the test is not going to happen. Alright? Other than that, go ahead and log into Math Excel and begin working on today's information. After you finish, start working on your past homework. We're going to be finishing up the chapter next week, but you do have a quiz on this information this week, and you want to make sure you start out on top. So other than that, good luck, and like I said, make sure you're asking questions and taking care of what you need to.